Deep in the ancient Appalachian wilderness, where morning mists cling to valleys like ghostly fingers and century-old trees whisper secrets to the wind, there exists a place where people simply vanish without a trace. When experienced hiker Marcus Brennan decides to explore an unmarked trail in the remote corners of western North Carolina, he has no idea that he's about to step into a nightmare that has claimed victims for generations. What begins as a peaceful autumn hiking trip transforms into a desperate fight for survival against something that lurks in the shadows between the trees, something that has been waiting, watching, and hunting in these mountains long before any map was ever drawn. This is a story of isolation, ancient evil, and the terrifying realization that some places on Earth were never meant to be disturbed by human feet. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. The autumn of 2023 arrived in the Appalachian Mountains with a peculiar heaviness, as if the very air itself carried the weight of centuries of secrets. Marcus Brennan had always found peace in these ancient hills, their rolling peaks stretching endlessly toward horizons that seemed to touch eternity itself. At 34 years old, he'd hiked hundreds of trails across the eastern United States. But something about the Appalachians always called him back, like a song he couldn't quite forget. It was late October when Marcus packed his weathered backpack and drove his old pickup truck along the winding mountain roads of western North Carolina. The leaves had turned brilliant shades of crimson and gold, creating a tapestry of color that would have taken any painter's breath away. His destination was a small town called Hollow Creek, a place so remote that most GPS systems didn't even register its existence. He'd heard about it from an old-timer at a hiking supply store in Asheville, a man with clouded eyes who'd spoken in hushed tones about trails that weren't on any official map. "There's paths up there that go back to before the Cherokee," the old man had told him, his gnarled fingers tracing invisible lines on the counter. Paths that were old when the first settlers arrived. But some of them trails, son, they ain't meant for walking anymore. Marcus had smiled politely at the warning, attributing it to small-town superstition and the kind of folklore that made the Appalachians so fascinating. He was a man of science, a geology professor on sabbatical, seeking nothing more than solitude and the opportunity to clear his mind after a difficult divorce. The supernatural held no sway over him, or so he believed. Hollow Creek turned out to be little more than a cluster of weathered houses huddled together as if seeking protection from the surrounding wilderness. The town consisted of a general store, a gas station that looked like it hadn't been updated since 1975, and a small diner with a flickering neon sign that read, "Maggie's Place." Marcus pulled into the gravel parking lot of the general store as the afternoon sun began its descent behind the mountains, casting long shadows that seemed to reach toward him like dark fingers. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, and the conversation inside immediately stopped. Three locals, two elderly men playing checkers and a middle-aged woman behind the counter, turned to look at him with expressions that weren't quite hostile but weren't welcoming either. It was the look of people who'd learned to be wary of outsiders. "Help you?" the woman asked, her voice neutral. "Just need some supplies," Marcus replied, offering his friendliest smile. "Planning to do some hiking in the area. Maybe you could recommend some trails." The two men exchanged glances, and one of them, wearing a faded John Deere cap, slowly shook his head. "Hunting season," he said simply. "Might want to stick to the marked trails near the parkway. Safer that way." But Marcus's attention had already been caught by the map on the wall behind the counter, a detailed topographical map of the surrounding area. His trained eye immediately spotted what looked like an old trail marked in faded pencil, leading deep into the eastern ridge into an area marked only as Blackwood Hollow. "What about there?" he asked, pointing to the location. "That looks interesting." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. The woman's face went pale, and the man who'd spoken earlier stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor with a sound like a scream. "That's private property," the woman said quickly. Too quickly. "Nothing up there but old mining claims and dangerous terrain. You'd best forget about Blackwood Hollow, mister." But the more they discouraged him, the more intrigued Marcus became. It was a character flaw he recognized in himself, this inability to leave mysteries alone. He purchased his supplies, along with a more detailed map of the region, and checked into the only motel in town, a dingy place called the Mountain View Lodge that ironically had no view of the mountains at all. That night, Marcus sat in his motel room, studying the maps by lamplight. Blackwood Hollow appeared to be a deep valley carved between two ridges, accessible only by an old trail that seemed to start about 5 miles north of town. According to his topographical map, the area featured several interesting geological formations, including what appeared to be a series of caves. His professional curiosity was piqued, and by morning, he'd made up his mind to explore it, local warnings be damned. He left at first light, driving his truck as far as the old logging road would allow before continuing on foot. The trail started clearly enough, marked by ancient blazes carved into trees that must have been made decades ago. The forest here felt different from other parts of the Appalachians he'd explored. The trees grew thicker, their branches interweaving overhead to create a canopy so dense that even the midday sun struggled to penetrate it. The underbrush grew wild and untamed, and Marcus noticed with growing unease that he couldn't hear any birds. The silence was profound and unsettling. In all his years of hiking, he'd never experienced a forest so devoid of animal sounds. No birds sang, no squirrels chattered, no insects buzzed. There was only the sound of his boots on the trail and his own breathing, which seemed unnaturally loud in the stillness. After 2 hours of hiking, the trail began to descend sharply into what must have been Blackwood Hollow. The air grew noticeably cooler, and a mist began to rise from the ground, swirling around his ankles like ghostly serpents. The trees here were massive, ancient hemlocks and oaks that must have been growing for centuries. Their bark was covered in strange patterns that looked almost like symbols, though Marcus told himself it was just natural weathering and the marks of insects. It was when he stopped for water that he first noticed the cairns. Stone markers, carefully stacked, appeared on either side of the trail. They weren't natural formations. Someone had deliberately placed them there. But they were old, covered in moss and lichen, some of them partially collapsed. Marcus counted 7 of them as the trail continued downward, each one larger than the last, until he reached the valley floor. Blackwood Hollow lived up to its name. The valley was dark, shadowed by the surrounding ridges and the dense canopy overhead. The ground was covered in a thick carpet of dead leaves that muffled his footsteps. In the center of the valley, Marcus could see the remains of old structures, collapsed cabins, and what might have been a small settlement at one time. Curiosity drew him forward. As he approached the ruins, Marcus felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Something felt wrong about this place, though he couldn't articulate exactly what. The ruins were more extensive than he'd first thought, the remains of at least a dozen structures scattered throughout the valley. But they weren't just old, they were ancient. The logs so rotted they crumbled at a touch. This settlement had been abandoned for a very long time. In what had once been the center of the village, Marcus found something that made him pause. A circle of standing stones, each about 4 feet tall, arranged in a perfect ring around a flat stone that might have been an altar. The stones were covered in carved symbols that he didn't recognize, nothing like the Cherokee petroglyphs he'd studied in his academic work. These symbols seemed older, somehow more primitive, and yet more deliberately arranged. Marcus pulled out his camera and began documenting the site. His scientific mind was racing with possibilities. This could be a significant archaeological find, evidence of a pre-Columbian civilization, or perhaps an early settler religious site. He was so focused on his photography that he didn't notice the sun had begun to set, the limited light in the valley fading rapidly to darkness. It was only when he heard the sound that Marcus realized how late it had gotten. At first, he thought it was wind in the trees, but then he recognized it for what it was breathing. Deep, rasping breaths that seemed to come from multiple directions at once, echoing through the valley like the panting of enormous lungs. Marcus's blood ran cold. He spun around, his flashlight beam cutting through the gathering darkness, but he saw nothing. The breathing continued, growing louder, closer, and then, between the trees at the edge of the clearing, he saw movement. Shapes, tall and impossibly thin, moving with a fluid grace that was distinctly inhuman. He ran. Pure instinct drove him back toward the trail, his flashlight bouncing wildly as he crashed through the undergrowth. Behind him, he could hear pursuit, the sound of something moving through the forest with frightening speed. Branches snapped, leaves rustled, and that terrible breathing grew louder, as if whatever was chasing him was excited by the hunt. Marcus knew these mountains, knew that running blindly in the dark was suicide. But terror had overridden his common sense. He stumbled over roots, tore through brambles that shredded his jacket and skin, and kept running, his lungs burning and his legs screaming in protest. The trail. Where was the trail? In his panic, he'd lost his bearings completely. He burst through a thicket and found himself at the edge of a ravine. His flashlight revealed a drop of at least 30 feet to a rocky stream bed below. He spun around, and that's when he saw them clearly for the first time. They stood at the edge of the clearing, three figures that were vaguely humanoid but wrong in every conceivable way. Too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent at impossible angles. Their skin, if it could be called skin, seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, making them appear as moving shadows given form. But it was their faces that would haunt Marcus's nightmares forever. They had no features, just smooth expanses where faces should be, except for mouths. Terrible mouths that opened far too wide, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. One of them tilted its head, studying Marcus with an intelligence that was somehow worse than if they'd been mindless beasts. Then it spoke, and the sound that came from its throat was not language, but something that bypassed Marcus's ears entirely and spoke directly to the primitive, terrified core of his brain. It was a sound of hunger, of ancient malevolence, of patient waiting finally rewarded. Marcus did the only thing he could do. He jumped. The fall seemed to last forever, long enough for him to regret every decision that had brought him to this moment, and then he hit the water with a shock that drove the air from his lungs. The stream was deeper than he'd expected and bitterly cold. The current caught him immediately, pulling him downstream over rocks that battered his body. But he didn't fight it. Anything to get away from those things. He rode the current for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, until his flailing hand caught a root extending from the bank. With the last of his strength, Marcus hauled himself out of the water and lay gasping on the muddy shore, his entire body screaming in pain. He'd lost his flashlight in the fall, his phone was destroyed by the water, and he had no idea where he was. The forest around him was pitch black, and in that darkness, he could hear them. They were still hunting him, moving through the trees, with the patience of creatures that had all the time in the world. Marcus forced himself to his feet and kept moving, using the sound of the stream to guide him. He moved as quietly as he could, but every snapped twig, every rustled leaf, seemed to echo like a gunshot in the silence. Twice more, he saw them, dark shapes, moving parallel to his path, and each time he changed direction, trying desperately to throw them off his trail. As dawn finally began to break, the quality of the forest changed. Marcus realized, with a sob of relief, that he could hear birds again, normal forest sounds returning. He'd somehow made it out of Blackwood Hollow. The creatures, whatever they were, hadn't followed him beyond some invisible boundary. It took him another 3 hours to find his way back to a road, and another hour after that, before a startled logger in a pickup truck found him, bloody, hypothermic, and babbling about things in the dark. The man drove him straight to the hospital in the next town over, where Marcus spent 2 days recovering from exposure, multiple contusions, and what the doctors called severe psychological trauma. When the authorities asked him what had happened, Marcus told them he'd gotten lost and fallen in the dark. He didn't mention Blackwood Hollow or what he'd seen there. He didn't mention the creatures. Who would believe him? He barely believed it himself, except for the proof written on his body in cuts and bruises. But there was one thing he couldn't explain away. When they'd given him his belongings at the hospital, his camera was among them, somehow still in his jacket pocket. The memory card was intact, and on it were the photos he'd taken of the stone circle. But there was one more photo, one he didn't remember taking. It must have been captured when he dropped the camera during his flight. The image was dark and blurry, but clear enough to make out shapes. 3 tall, impossibly thin figures standing in a circle around something on the ground. And that something, Marcus realized with cold horror, was not the first person to stumble into Blackwood Hollow. It was what remained of someone else, though there wasn't enough left to identify. Marcus deleted the photo immediately. He deleted all of them. Some discoveries, he realized, were never meant to be shared with the world. Some places were isolated and forgotten for very good reasons. He left the Appalachians that same day and never returned. He moved west to the deserts of Arizona, where the land was open and everything was visible for miles in every direction. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls through his windows, Marcus can hear it, that terrible breathing, patient and hungry, waiting in the dark places of the world where the maps have blank spaces and the old warnings are remembered by only a few. The general store in Hollow Creek still has that faded map on the wall, and the locals still warn outsiders about Blackwood Hollow, though fewer people ask about it these days. Most folks have sense enough to respect the boundaries, to understand that there are places in these ancient mountains where humans are not the dominant species, where things older than memory still hold dominion. And in the depths of Blackwood Hollow, in that dark valley where the sun barely reaches and the birds do not sing, the stone circle remains undisturbed. The creatures that guard it are patient. They have been patient for centuries, and they can wait centuries more, because they know that eventually someone else will come. Someone else will ignore the warnings, will push past the boundaries, will stumble into their domain, and they will be waiting. Marcus Brennan survived his encounter with the darkness in Blackwood Hollow, but he was forever changed by it. He gave up geology, gave up hiking, gave up any profession or hobby that might take him into the remote places of the world. He lives a quiet urban life now, surrounded by concrete and streetlights and the comfortable noise of humanity. But he knows the truth. He knows that beyond the reach of our cities and our lights, beyond the boundaries of our maps and our understanding, there are places where we are not welcome. Places where ancient things hold sway, where the rules of our modern world do not apply, where the darkness is not empty but full of patient, hungry intelligence. The Appalachian Mountains are beautiful, ancient, and vast beyond imagining. They hold wonders and secrets in equal measure, but they also hold horrors, things that have no name and need none. Things that were old when humanity was young and will remain long after we are gone. Marcus sometimes wonders if he was lucky or if the creatures let him go deliberately, knowing that his story would serve as another warning that would inevitably be ignored. It doesn't matter. He survived, he escaped, and he carries the memory of Blackwood Hollow like a scar on his soul. And late at night, when sleep eludes him and the desert wind howls past his windows, Marcus listens to the darkness and remembers. He remembers the stone circle, the ancient symbols, the shapes between the trees. He remembers the terrible, patient hunger in those non-faces. And he knows with absolute certainty that somewhere in those mountains, in that forgotten valley, they are still there, still waiting, still hungry, still patient. And there we have it, friends, the story of Marcus Brennan and his harrowing encounter in Blackwood Hollow. As you prepare to drift off to sleep tonight, remember that stories like these remind us to respect the wild places of our world, to honor the boundaries that exist for good reason, and to understand that some mysteries are better left unsolved. Whether this tale was based on truth or purely the wanderings of imagination, let it serve as a gentle reminder of the power these ancient mountains hold in our collective consciousness. The Appalachians have stood for millennia, witnessing countless human stories, and they will continue to stand long after we are gone. So rest easy, dear listener. You are safe in your bed, far from forgotten hollows and dark valleys. Let this story fade into your dreams like morning mist, and may you wake refreshed and grateful for the simple comforts of civilization. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the shadows. Sleep well, and remember, the darkness is only as frightening as we allow it to be. In the light of day, even the deepest valleys reveal their beauty, and even the oldest fears lose their power. Good night, friends, sweet dreams, and until we meet again for another tale, may your sleep be peaceful and your dreams be gentle. Rest now. You've earned it.
The locked room where every tenant vanished. They called it the kind of detail police hate. A tidy lock story with a missing person at the center. Apartment 3C at the Rookwood Arms brown brick, narrow hallways, Cleveland's snow-blackened plow piles out front, had been rented 6 times in 8 years. Every lease ended the same way. A tenant vanishes. The deadbolt is thrown from the inside, the chain is latched, windows painted shut, still shut, no tool marks, no prints that shouldn't be there, a room that looks like it just inhaled and forgot to exhale. The first disappearance barely made the paper. A grad student named Mark Ellis stopped showing up to the lab. His advisor came by, banged on the door. When maintenance finally drilled the lock, they found the chain engaged, the key hooked neatly on a nail by the stove, and Mark's phone on the counter with an alarm frozen at 2:17 a.m. The only strange thing anyone wrote down was a metronome ticking on the dresser, one of those wooden pyramids you see on piano tops set to a slow beat that did not match the clock. It took 3 days to notice his shoes were missing, and his coat wasn't. 2 years later, 3C went on the market again. The landlord, Mr. Alvarez, a decent man with 17 keys and one expression for bad news, added a clause about previous incidents and knocked $100 off the rent. A nurse named Jenna Price took it. Third shift at County. 2 weeks in, she left a voicemail for her sister at 2:41 a. "It's doing it again," she said, breathless, like she'd run from one room to another. The closet clicked. Not opened, clicked. "If you wake up, call me. I'm not looking at it this time." In the morning, her kettle was whistled dry, her scrubs were in a folded pile by the door, the deadbolt was thrown, the chain was on, and Jenna was gone. The peephole had been stuffed from the inside with a wad of cotton. No one could agree whether that made it creepier or safer. By the time tenant 3, an older man named Hargrove, disappeared, the building had a joke that wasn't a joke. 3C comes with an extra lock on your life. Hargrove was the kind who sets traps for drafts. He tied fishing line from the closet knob to the radiator so he'd feel it tug if air moved. He taped the bathroom door with a strip of receipt paper like a detective on TV. He slid a dime under the front door so any entry would push it in or out. When they opened the apartment after his mail piled up, the paper was unbroken, the dime still centered, the line still tied. He had written one sentence on a yellow legal pad and left it under the metronome. "Do not look in the mirror after it knocks." Detective Quinn drew the caseboard no one wanted. She pinballed between practical and impossible. Fire escape? Rusted shut? Painted straight into the brick. Ceiling hatch? None. Ducts? Too small for anyone but a raccoon, and even raccoons show signs. Cameras? 2 on the exterior only. They captured a delivery driver, a fight over a parking spot, and, once, a stray dog trotting out of frame with an entire baguette, nothing at 2 a.m. on any night anyone disappeared. She sat in 3C at noon, with the blinds cracked, and ate a stale donut over the sink, like maybe hunger was the problem. She sat there at 2:10 a.m. with the lights off and the kitchen clock ticking like fingernails, and nothing happened. It never does when you're watched. I didn't live there. I just tell stories for the kind of people who click play at midnight. But I know a property manager named Dottie, who knows a locksmith named Ray, who owed her a favor. So one gray Tuesday, with Quinn's weary permission and Mr. Alvarez's keyring singing like a tambourine, we went in. 3C felt clean in the way that makes you suspicious. The kind of clean you do right after you spill something you don't want anyone to know about. Fresh coat of eggshell. New chain. The closet single door, original hinge faced the bed. The bathroom mirror had been moved once. You could see the old oval shadow on the paint where a different mirror had hung. There was a faint iron smell in the corner where the radiator stuttered. A neighbor said that's just hot water pipes in old buildings. Maybe. Or maybe you never forget the smell of pennies once you think you've smelled it. We rigged the room like we were inventing a mystery for amateur detectives. Tape on the chain, chalk along the door seam, a baking sheet on the floor with a handful of coins to sing if anything moved. Flour just inside the threshold, because nothing tells the truth like a footprint. Ray ran a thin line of blue painter's tape around the bathroom mirror. If it moved, we'd see it. Dottie set her phone to record the closet, time-stamped. I chalked a quiet X on the edge of the dresser where the metronome had sat in the old photos because I am a superstitious person who swears I'm not. We turned the lights off and waited. That's the part TV gets wrong. Waiting isn't tense, it's stupid. Your brain lists groceries, memories of people you should have been kinder to, passwords you can't change because you gave up years ago. The radiator sighed. The building settled. The hallway coughed up someone's door, slammed 3 floors down. At 2:13, Quinn murmured, "Hear that?" We all did. A sound like a fingertip testing glass. Not a knock, a check. Then, nothing. At 2:31, the temperature dropped 2 degrees. Not drama, just the move from sweater to jacket. The closet door did not open. It clicked. Once, like a tongue deciding to form a word and then choosing silence instead. The baking sheet didn't sing, the chain didn't tug, the flour lay there like winter. Quinn stood, slow. "I want the hall," she whispered. She eased the door, but we had taped it so we could see the tape split. It didn't. She pressed her eye to the peephole. Empty. Then, wait. Her shoulders tightened. Someone just walked by without walking by. She backed away. "That's a stupid sentence," she said, trying to laugh, and sat down. At 2:37, the bathroom motion sensor chirped even though we didn't have one. We didn't bring a motion sensor. Dottie pointed at the mirror. A hairline of blue tape lifted and pressed back like breath under a blanket. We didn't move. "Don't feed it," Quinn said, and I thought of the note. "Do not look after, it knocks." At 2:41, Dottie's phone facing the closet captured something our eyes didn't. A blur along the jamb, as if the dark inside had pressed its face to the gap to see if we were still watching. The closet didn't open. It wanted us to look away, so it could. How do I know that's what it wanted? Because at 2:47, the building fire alarm whooped one sudden false start, then died. Every human head went toward the ceiling. Every human body looked away from the closet for exactly one heartbeat. In that beat, the baking sheet rang like a cheap cymbal, one coin skittered toward the bed, the closet door eased 3 inches, and the iron smell came out like a story that had been waiting for the right listener. Quinn said, "No, not loud, not a plea, a rule." She took one step, shut the closet with 2 fingers on the wood like she was closing a sleepy child's eyes, and set the latch. The click was small and final. The room listened to itself. So did we. We didn't sleep there. We came back at noon like cowards and investigators, because daylight is for pretending you're in charge. We pulled the closet entirely empty. Shelves, back panel, baseboard. Nothing. Except a rectangle low in the rear wall where someone had patched plaster over an old service opening. Not big, maybe a foot. The kind of dumbwaiter shoot a pre-war building would have used to send laundry down. But behind the plaster, when Ray knocked, was not hollow distance. It was a seam. Like the building had been built around a pocket. We cut the patch. What waited was a crawl space tall enough to insult you. Dead air, old dust, and 4 objects laid very carefully on a strip of faded carpet. A metronome, a hospital badge with Jenna's name scrubbed off by time, but the clip still sticky. A brass key tagged 3C in Mr. Alvarez's handwriting, and a dime polished by fingers. Quinn held the badge with 2 gloved fingers like she was lifting a butterfly. "It's not a passage," she said, and she was right. The space had no exit. The wood joists boxed it in. You could put an arm in, not a person. Yet somehow a person had put things there on 6 separate occasions if you believed the lease history, and walked out of a locked room without stepping into a hallway. We sealed the opening again, this time with screws you could not ignore. Alvarez broke the news at a folding table in the lobby. 3C is closed, he said. "No more leases." Someone clapped, then realized that wasn't the right response. The city inspector signed a paper and tucked it into a folder like the act of filing could domesticate a problem. 3 months went by. People find other things to be afraid of. I kept asking Quinn if she'd let me tell the story. She kept saying, "Tell it when it's over." It wasn't. A couple on the 2nd floor complained about knocking after midnight. Not on their door, inside their bathroom mirror. You don't put that in a report. You write, "Pipes." A delivery guy swore he saw a man standing in the 3rd floor hallway in a dark jacket at 2:35 a.m. The camera showed an empty corridor and, for 1 frame only, the light reflecting on nothing as if a shoulder had been where a shoulder would be. The last time I went up to 3C, the city had bolted a steel plate over the door. Quinn had the key, because someone has to. 15 minutes, she said. We stepped into a room that hadn't been breathed in for weeks. Dust had sorted itself into the place's dust likes. The closet stood shut. The chain on the front door lay slack. I put my hand on the dresser where the metronome had once sat and felt nothing but wood. And yet, at 2:17, don't ask me why I was there. At 2:17 again. Of course, I was the chain, lifted a hair with no hand on it. The flour we had swept weeks ago, but never fully got out of the cracks, made a thin whisper. The closet latch pressed back against itself and held, not opening. Testing. "Why here?" I asked the room, which is a ridiculous thing to ask a room unless you've spent a season learning its calendar. Quinn looked at the mirror, at the closet, at the seam we had sealed. "Because it needs a witness," she said, as if trying the sentence for size. Doors, mirrors, they're only interesting when someone is on the other side. Every tenant looked. Every tenant gave it what it wanted. Attention is a kind of key. "Then what do?" I asked. "You don't open it," she said. "You don't look after it knocks. You move out. You change the screws. Or," she glanced at the chain, "you plate the door and let it talk to itself." Rookwood Arms rented 3C to no one after that. The steel plate stayed. Someone taped a note to it once, "Stop this." It read more like a prayer than a command. People still ask what the explanation is. Easy ones first. A human hid in the walls. There is a hidden corridor we missed. Someone with a duplicate key loved tricks more than laws. Or, less easy. Some rooms rehearse a shape, and if you live there, the room uses you to complete it. It knocks to teach you where to look. It wants that first flinch, the glance, the step. After that, it's already inside the part of you that opens doors to be polite. I don't know. I know this. Apartments hold on to what you do in them. In 3C, a metronome ticked for 3 owners who never owned one. A dime kept finding its way back to a strip of faded carpet. A closet learned to click like a person testing a word. And every time the locks told the same story, police dread, the last person here, left with everything secured behind them. Some nights, if I'm driving past Rookwood late, I'll park on the street and watch the 3rd floor where 3C sits behind its plate. The hallway light runs on a timer. It hums. Nothing moves. Nothing ever does when you plan to see it. And I'll sit there, window cracked to the cold, and count to 30, then 30 more, and let the building be just a building, until I hear maybe in the pipes, maybe in my head, a polite little click, as if a latch has just decided to try again. The man who was seen in 2 states at once. At 7:12 p.m., a cashier at a Chevron in Gallup, New Mexico, watched a man in a green work jacket buy a coffee and a pack of mints. He paid in cash, left a couple quarters on the counter, and stepped back into the wind. The camera by the door caught his face as the door swung shut. Mid-30s, dark hair pushed back, 2 days of beard, and a pale crescent scar under the right thumb. The receipt timestamp synced to the store's network clock, which synced to the same atomic time as the pumps. No drift, clean. At 7:12 p.m., a cage supervisor at the Mesas Grande Casino in Window Rock, Arizona, watched a man in a green work jacket pull $20 in chips from the felt and slide them into his pocket. He nodded to the dealer, lifted a paper cup of coffee, and turned toward the camera by the pit. Same face, same hair, same scar under the right thumb. Their system synced to GPS time every hour on the hour. No drift, clean. 2 states, 1 minute, 1 man. On paper, it was impossible. On paper, most of the worst stories are. I wasn't supposed to be on the case. I write the weird ones. The outliers, people in small departments are tired of explaining to reporters who want blood and answers in the same sentence. But when Detective Aaron Halloran from the San Juan County Sheriff's Office sent me a text with 2 stills stacked like mugshots and wrote, "Explain this," I drove north out of Albuquerque with a thermos and a notebook and the uneasy feeling that the night was going to make more sense than the day. The man had a name. Connor Hale. Roofer. Paid in cash more often than he should have. Lived in a short lease place on East Aztec in Gallup with a toolbox under the bed and a coffee maker that had learned exactly one job. No outstanding warrants. No priors. A sister in Farmington who said he could be kind when he wanted to be and mean when he was tired. An ex who would not return calls. A scar on his hand you could spot across a room because a ladder had taught him a lesson he kept learning anyway. Connor had also, depending on who you asked, committed an offense the day before the double sighting. A woman named Allison Torres filed a report just after noon stating that her back door latch had been jimmied and a shoebox had gone missing from the top of her closet. She listed no electronics, no jewelry, just old negatives and some church papers from my mom. Allison and Connor had dated the kind of summer that teaches you what you're not good at and ended it the way people do when they don't want to admit they were scared for a reason they can't articulate. She told Halloran that Connor had been texting weird, like remembering things I don't remember with him, and then the box was gone. By 6:40 p.m., phones began to ping towers in a way that later would make a line on a map. Connor's phone, New Mexico, 491 southbound, then I-40 west. Not fast. No weaving. A worker's drive at the end of a shift. Then, the pings did something phones don't do. At 7:09 p.m., a hit off a small cell inside the casino in Window Rock. At 7:10, a hit off a tower south of Gallup by the river. At 7:12, both. 2 pings, 2 places. Glitch? I asked Halloran. Because if you say the simple thing first, you sometimes get to keep your pride. They ran it through 3 times, she said, and slid her finger across the screen to show me the tower logs. Navajo Dispatch saw it too. Our radios are synced. Their system is synced. It's not drift. What about the phone? An Android from a pawn shop, she said. We found it later, in a ditch. The ditch would come later. The night came first. We drove the distance between the Chevron and the casino in silence, the desert evening making a dome out of itself, and the radio playing a song none of us wanted to hear. It's 46 minutes if you don't dawdle, and the wind doesn't remind you who owns your lane. It's not 1 minute, it's not the amount of time that lets a human be solid in 2 places at once. At the Chevron, the cashier, a kid with a shaved head and a sweatshirt from a team that never wins enough to be hated, replayed the footage for us with 1 finger. He said thanks, the kid said. Not a lot of people do. Connor nodded at the camera, the way you do without meaning to, and I felt the small electric zip of recognition you get when a face leaves the screen and becomes a person in your head. The clock in the corner read 19, 12, 21. The pump log read 19, 12, 21. The receipt, 19, 12, 21. At the casino, the pit boss leaned on the rail and watched himself watching the tape. He didn't play long, he said. 2 hands, maybe 3. He bled the 20 and stood up. The cameras stitched a story. The jacket, the scar, the coffee he didn't drink, the turn toward the pit lens that caught his eyes full, on tired, not high, determined in the way people get when they've already decided what the night is for. The clock in the corner read 19, 12, 21. We pulled the NTP logs, the IT guy said later, because some people sleep with acronyms under their pillow. It's right. It should have been simple. 2 men who looked similar. It should have been that easy. But Connor's scar wasn't a haircut. It wasn't a hat. It was a crescent pale enough to glow on cheap cameras, a bite out of the meat below the thumb, where a rung and a fall had made a promise to his hand. Both videos had it. Same place, same shape. In the stills, you could overlay them and the white would cover the white. Back at the sheriff's office, Halloran's board had the usual case diet. Arrows between photos, names written in marker that tried not to shake, a timeline that made a straight line until it didn't. At 8:02, a trucker on I-40 westbound called in a tan Tacoma driving without taillights. At 8:14, a woman in Church Rock reported a man matching Connor's description, walking on the shoulder carrying nothing, and looking like a person who had been left at a gas station on purpose. At 8:33, a deputy out by Fort Defiance ran a plate that came back to a rental white Impala, reported late by a man from Phoenix, who swore he returned it on time and whose signature on the form looked exactly like his name didn't want to be. There. The ditch showed up at 9:06 p.m. on a county maintenance report. Debris near mile marker 26 on 491. A road crew guy stopped his rig, threw on a vest, and dragged a Walmart bag out of scrub. Inside, an Android phone, its back taped, a prepaid SIM with 2 sets of numbers printed on the card, and a key fob for a Ram truck with the buttons worn to their ghosts. The Android booted to a screen no one at the office liked, 2 messaging apps, 1 cloned, 2 Uber accounts, 2 bank apps logged into 2 versions of 1 name. The GPS history scrubbed still coughed up 1 truth. The phone believed it had been in 2 places at once at 7:12. which meant someone had taught it how to lie, or someone had taught the night how to listen. We ran the rest. ATM cameras, parking lot domes, the one church where the ring cam pointed not at the door, but at the road, because the deacon liked to know who was late. Everything had Connor in it, except the footage that didn't. The first crack came from a place that loves paperwork. The casino cage reported a cash out at 7:15 for $20 in chips, paid to the man in the green jacket. They matched the serial numbers on 2 bills to a series deposited at a bank in Gallup at 4:02 p.m. That afternoon, from a roofing contractor named Hale Roofing, one employee, Connor, who had cashed a check at the counter. Those 2 bills couldn't be in 2 places at once either. Unless the casino got the bills from someone who already had them in his pocket, which meant Connor had been working a loop he'd designed and we were late to the lesson. Plate cloning, Halloran said, pointing at a still of the Impala with a New Mexico rental tag and another still of what looked like the same car with an Arizona temp taped in the rear window. Phone cloning, she added, tapping the Android, the double apps. What else can you clone? Yourself, I said, without meaning to. We asked about brothers. None. We asked about friends who could pass for him. One, Randy Porter, brown hair, same age, same build, same bar tab. Randy swore he was at his mother's that night, and his mother, who had the weariness of women who have watched men try to talk themselves out of their own lives, nodded without enthusiasm. We asked about his ex. She finally called back from a number that died as soon as we hung up and said Connor was a good person when he remembered how and a bad one when he forgot. About the negatives? My mom's church group, she said. Baptisms, funerals, potlucks, those little town things that add up to a life. On day 3, Connor's truck turned up in a motel lot in Thoreau, wiped clean down to its regrets. Room 12 smelled like old coffee and determination. In the trash, 2 razors, a box of hair dye, a receipt from a thrift store for a green jacket. In the Bible, a business card for Mesas Grande casino cage number in blue ink and a folded half of one of the church negatives, cut to show a boy standing at a picnic table with a white paper cup and a smile I didn't want to describe as hopeful because it would mean I was guessing, here's where the story should end, with a chase, or a confession, or a rescue. It didn't. It ended the way some deserts do suddenly, and with clarity you didn't ask for. A rancher riding fence near the state line called in a body 3 days later, curled in the shallow windbreak on the New Mexico side of the line, like sleep had been a job he finally found himself able to do. The autopsy said exposure complicated by dehydration. The time of death, somewhere in the window, that included the minute 2 cameras caught him being impossible. The scar under the right thumb made the identification before the prints did. In his pocket, 2 chips from Mesas Grande, a Chevron receipt, and the other half of the negative. The boy at the picnic table in the cut photo had a face Tessa Allison's mother recognized when Halloran brought the picture around. He came to see me once, the older woman said, surprised not at the visit, but at the fact that telling the truth could still be a relief. Said he wanted to know if he'd ever been better. I told him, once. The phone work kept fracturing us after he was gone. Someone had spoofed Connor's number with a second, bought a cheap Android, cloned accounts, and triggered pings off 2 towers on purpose using a Wi-Fi calling app. The casino bill match said the cash was really his, not counterfeit, and that told us only that he had done at least part of the loop himself. The green jacket from the thrift store matched both videos. The scar matched both frames, which left one ugly conclusion and one stranger one. Either he had an accomplice who looked enough like him to fool a camera and cared enough to bleed exactly where Connor bled, or Connor had orchestrated his own magic trick, hollowing out the rules until the rules let him slip through. 1 man, 2 places, a minute carved out of the night like a hiding place he couldn't keep. Detective Halloran keeps the 2 stills pinned side by side above her desk. She doesn't need them for the case file anymore. Officially, it's closed. Exposure, no foul play. Unsolved theft, no suspect. She keeps them because every now and then a new officer will walk in, glance up, and say, that's not possible. And she'll nod and say, I know, and tell them about the twin pings, the thrift store jacket, the ditch phone, the serial numbers on coffee money, the way a person can be a boarder if they decide hard enough. People in Gallup say they still see Connor at the Chevron, just a flash of jacket in the glass when the door swings. People in Window Rock say a man with a pale scar buys 2 chips at the cage sometimes, leaves them on the rail, and walks away. I don't believe in ghosts. I believe in people who make plans and then get tired. But on the drive back to Albuquerque, the radio lost the signal west of Grants, and the night opened up wider than the lane, and for a mile or two I thought I could feel it. 2 versions of the same story, walking in step on either side of the state line, keeping pace, and then quietly letting go. The mystery of the phone calls coming from the basement. The first call came at 2:17 a.m., and it shouldn't have been possible. 911, what's your emergency? A thin hiss. The sound of water somewhere, and then a voice so small the dispatcher almost missed it. It's dark. Sir or ma'am, where are you? A scraping noise. Metal against concrete. The voice again, closer to the mic, but no louder. Downstairs. Okay, what's your address? Silence. Then the click of a line going dead. When the dispatcher pulled the automatic number identification, the system spat out a surprise. The call had originated from a landline registered to a single-family home on Willow Court in a quiet Pennsylvania cul-de-sac, and this part always makes officers ready. Their best found the address was less than 3 blocks from the county dispatch center. Patrol was there in under 2 minutes. Lights off, curtains drawn, an SUV in the driveway, a second car inside the garage, no signs of forced entry. Officer Dwyer knocked, then rang, then knocked the way cops do when they want the whole street to know it. Finally, a light flared in the hall, and a man with pillow marks on his face opened the door with both palms up. What's going on? Sir, did someone in your home call 911? The man blinked. We were asleep. He stood aside, and the officer stepped into the tidy entry in the tidy air. They woke the woman and the 11-year-old and checked closets, because that's what you do when you don't know what else to do. They followed the hallway to a door that stuck a little at the top and opened onto a set of wooden steps. The basement smelled like old paint and laundry soap. There was a freezer, a workbench, a dehumidifier blinking a polite green, and along the far wall, a beige rotary phone mounted beside the breaker panel like an artifact. The cord dangled unplugged from the jack. Officer Dwyer pointed. That yours? The homeowner, Mark Price, shook his head. Came with the house. We don't have a landline. Cut the service when we moved in. We just use our cells. They stood there in the quiet, 3 adults and a relic, and listened to the space where a dial tone wasn't. Dispatch called back. The callback rang in the kitchen upstairs. Caller ID displayed a single word, basement. Jenna Price answered on the 3rd ring with her shoulders already up by her ears. Hello? Only breathing. Then a whisper, clear as if a mouth were pressed against the handset. Please come down. The line died. The next day, the Prices called their provider to make something rational happen. A tech named Donna arrived with a hard case and a look like she'd been dared. She tested the demarcation box outside. No service at the network interface, no loop current. Her meter read a flat, explanatory 0. She shrugged, went inside, and followed the line to the basement. The beige phone had the weight of old decisions. She lifted the handset and listened to the absence. This thing's a museum piece, she said. She pulled the jack from the wall and removed the entire phone for good measure, coiling the orphan cord like she was putting a snake back in a bag. That night, at 2:31, the kitchen phone rang again. Caller ID, basement. Jenna let it ring 9 times while her brain tried and failed to build a box to put it in. Mark answered on the 10th. Who is this? Silence, and then that same thin, watery background, a sound like someone dragging a chain across the floor very slowly. A voice. It's locked. What's locked? Please, come down. Click. On night 3, the call came to Mark's cell at 3:07. The display showed their own home number. He answered and held the phone away so Jenna could hear too. Nothing at first. Then the softest series of tones, like a child tapping out a song on a digital keypad. When the recording later got cleaned up by a friend of a friend in the county IT office, the The tones resolved into DTMF numbers that didn't form a phone number but did form coordinates, if you squinted. A latitude that crossed Willow Court, and a longitude that, if measured on the county's GIS map, fell in the middle of the Price's backyard, 4 feet below grade. Detective Marcus Alvarez took the case on day 4 because he had a reputation for being the sort of man who didn't laugh at the wrong things. Alvarez had grown up 4 blocks from a steel mill that learned how to be quiet long before the town did. He believed in things you can hold in your hand and in the kinds of stories that try to explain themselves. He stood in the Price's kitchen, listened to the recordings, walked the backyard with his hands in his pockets, then went back inside and asked to see the basement. He noticed the small stuff. A faint line of dust across the floor where it seemed like something heavy had once been, a plastic laundry basket with a crack that had been taped with the kind of tape you don't buy on purpose, and a rectangular outline on the cinder block wall behind a pegboard like a door had been sealed badly, then painted over to match. He pressed a knuckle to the rectangle. The hollow knock you get when a space is pretending not to be a space answered back. "Who sealed this?" he asked. Mark looked at Jenna. Jenna looked at the floor. "We didn't even notice it," she said. "We've only been here 3 months. Alvarez made a note. He asked about the previous owner. Retired, moved to Florida. Before them, papers said a foreclosure and 4 years of vacancy. Before that, an older couple, no kids, according to the neighbor across the cul-de-sac, who delivered his biography as if it were a casserole. No one mentioned anything about phones. Night 4, Alvarez arranged a stakeout. He sat up in the living room with a thermos and a notepad and the manner of a man willing to be bored if that's what it took to be right. At 2:14 a.m., something popped in the ductwork in a way that would make anyone have a small private conversation with their own heart. At 2:17, the kitchen phone rang. Caller ID. Basement. He answered, "This is Detective Alvarez. Who am I speaking to?" A breath, a hitch, and then a whisper. "It's wet." "What is?" "The floor." "Where are you?" "Please, come down. Tell me what's locked." No answer. The line didn't hang up so much as forget it had ever been a line. Alvarez went to the basement with his radio clipped to his jacket. The beam of his flashlight found everything it was supposed to find and nothing it wasn't. He ran the light along the sealed rectangle. The paint looked newer there, but not new. The sort of paint you apply to make your past the same color as your walls. He pressed again. The rectangle thudded back, like a box with something in it. The voice returned this time not through the phone, but through the air. Not loud, not clear, a breath that formed a word and fell apart before it left its own mouth. Alvarez isn't a man who hears footsteps in the wind. He's a man who waits. He waited. The water heater ticked. The dehumidifier purred. He went back upstairs and told the Prices to lock up and try to sleep. He drove a slow circle around the block twice before he went back to the station to start the part of a case he was good at, asking old paper for new answers. At records, he requested permits. 30 years of basement work for Willow Court. 2 caught his eye. An early permit for stormwater remediation, French drain and sump, and 10 years later, structural modification utility access alcove. He requested photos. The early permit showed a trench around the interior perimeter of the basement, a cut channel like a moat. The later showed a mason standing where the sealed rectangle now lived, a hole yawning behind him. The caption, "Coal chute, closed." The date on that photo matched the year the older couple had put the house on the market. Alvarez went quiet in the way you do when the story turns its face to show you a different angle. Day 5, the provider sent Donna back, this time with a colleague in a more expensive meter. They tested at the D-mark again. Nothing. They ran a portable butt set from the kitchen jack and got a dial tone that had no business being there. They traced the inside wiring and found hidden behind a stack of paint cans a small beige box wired into the line ahead of the jacks. Donna frowned. "Alarm panel?" Mark shook his head. They opened it. Inside, a basic cellular dialer with a prepaid SIM, its battery swollen, its antenna tacked up under the joist. It would, when signaled, place a call that looked on paper like it had originated from the landline. It should have been dead. Donna unplugged it and set it on the workbench. "That's your ghost," she said, dusting off her hands. At 2:31 that night, the phone rang again. Caller ID, basement. The message this time was different. Not a whisper, not a plea. Tones, 10 clear beeps, faster now and then, the sound of water louder than before, like a faucet turned and left. Alvarez played the beeps to the county IT friend, who mapped them to digits. 0311 BLKDOR. Not quite numbers, not quite letters. But close enough to raise a hair you couldn't brush down. 311 BLKDOR. March 11, Black Door. Or Unit 311, Block Door. Or nothing at all. Alvarez returned to the basement with a hammer drill and a warrant that described the rectangle as non-load bearing. He cut along the edges and pried until the panel grudgingly gave. Behind it, a not huge, not small cavity. A little room carved out of cinder block, 8 feet across, maybe 5 deep. The floor was stained a darker color in the center, a shape water leaves when it tries and fails to go somewhere. In the corner, an old sump pump sat unplugged like a man off shift. On the wall, a telephone company junction block from a different decade, and a cheap plastic trimline phone with a cracked handset, cradle screwed into the block. Its cord led to nowhere obvious. Alvarez lifted the receiver. Dial tone. He blinked. He traced the line with his fingers and found a pencil-thin wire run through a mortar joint toward the back of the alcove. He followed it into a ragged hole that opened onto another hole. The foundation had been cut years ago by someone patient into the void behind the old coal chute. The wire ran through to a second junction he couldn't reach with his hand. He fetched a mirror on a telescoping stick from his car, the kind mechanics use to see bolts that don't want to be seen, and slid it into the dark. The mirror showed a second handset and the glint of a metal tag stamped with the name of a local truck rental company and something else that didn't fit with lines or phones or trucks, scratches on the concrete. 4 parallel gouges at knee height, like someone had tried to pull themselves through and learned the space would only take an arm. He lowered the mirror, he looked at the floor stain, he imagined wet years, he imagined storm days when the creek at the end of Willow Court made the cul-de-sac an island. He imagined the older couple deciding to seal something and the contractor raising an eyebrow and putting up a panel because he was paid to. He imagined a kid because of the voice, and then he stopped imagining because he's not paid to build monsters that fit the dark. The state lab took the panel and the handset and the swollen cellular dialer. They took a sample of the stain. They took prints from everything printable and found only smudges that belonged to Mark and Donna and Alvarez. They found no blood. They found in the handset mouthpiece a single hair too degraded to profile. They did not find a body. They did not find anyone who wanted to claim any of it. The part you don't want to hear is that the calls didn't stop. They changed. They came less often. They came at 2, 17 and 2, 31, and sometimes on 3 separate nights at 3/7, a time that would matter to Alvarez later when he learned that the county flood siren used to be tested at 3:0 a.m. on the first Monday of the month, and that once, one spring, it failed at 3:7, and that on that same morning, a boy named Tyler from 3 streets over had skipped school and cut through the Willow Court drainage easement on his way to the old mill, and that no one remembered seeing him after lunch. Records showed Tyler's mother had called 911 that afternoon to report him missing. There was a transcript. In the middle of her call, another 911 call had come in from an unidentified number. The old system hadn't captured it. The dispatcher took it, heard nothing but water and an open line, and cleared it as a pocket dial. That was years ago. The file is thin, the case is cold. Alvarez made a note he would never be sure what to do with. 2 weeks after the wall was opened, a heavy rain hit. The creek put its shoulder to the bend behind the cul-de-sac. The sump pump in the alcove hummed like an old promise and then coughed and died. Mark ran an extension cord and brought down a shop vac. Jenna stood on the steps with a flashlight shaking in a way it didn't when she held it for ordinary tasks. At 2:45 the phone rang. Caller ID, basement. Jenna answered and put it on speaker. Alvarez, in the driveway, with his wipers metronoming a small symphony, heard the same thin hiss, the same drag of something across concrete, and then a voice that was not quite the same voice, but felt like a hand laid on top of an older hand. "Don't open it," it said. "What?" Jenna asked. "Don't open the door." "What door?" Alvarez asked, leaning into the kitchen so his voice would make it to the mic. Silence. Then a whisper he didn't want to admit. He heard. Black. The door to the alcove had already been opened days ago. There was no black door, unless you counted a panel of painted cinder blocks someone once used to keep a part of the house from being part of the house. At 3:07, the phone rang one more time. It didn't show basement. It showed the Price's own number. Mark answered with his jaw set. The line carried only one thing, the stuttering squeal of a modem handshake, the kind you used to hear when the internet lived in the wires. It rose and fell, and then dissolved into white hiss. Donna later told them there was no path in the system for a call like that anymore. "It's noise," she said. "Old echoes." The case file is thick now, and thin where it matters. Alvarez can tell you about the sealed alcove and the handset and the swollen dialer and the coordinates that almost spelled something and the scratch marks that maybe weren't. He can tell you about the neighbor who remembered a summer of sump pumps and a boy named Tyler whose mother moved west after the mill closed because she couldn't stand the sound of the creek. He can tell you that he stood in a basement at 2:31 a.m. and listened to a line carry water like a throat carries breath, and that he believes human beings make human troubles. He can tell you that houses also keep their own time. Here's what no one will tell you, because there isn't a way to make it tidy. The county rewired the street. The provider replaced the drop. The Prices changed their number. The calls slowed and then stopped, and then, once in winter, when ice made the creek a glass tongue and the cul-de-sac sounded like a museum, the phone in the kitchen rang at 2:17. Caller ID, basement. Jenna answered, because she always will. "Hello?" A breath. The quiet of a room that isn't empty. Someone, somewhere, shifting their weight the way you do when you're bracing a shoulder against a door. "It's dark," the voice said, almost apologetic. "I can't find the handle." "Whose voice is this?" Alvarez asked later, playing it back in the station with the blinds drawn and a yellow pad full of notes that didn't move anything forward. "A kid," Dwyer said. "A recording," Donna said. An echo, the dispatcher who took the first call said softly, not as a theory, as a wish. The Prices live on Willow Court still. The alcove stays open. The sump pump is new and louder. The beige rotary phone is in a plastic bag in the property locker with a tag that will outlast all of them. Some nights, when rain presses the creek until it remembers, Jenna leaves the kitchen light on and the basement light off and sits at the table with her hands around a mug she doesn't drink from and waits. If the phone rings, she answers. If the voice asks her to come down, she says, "Tell me where you are." If it says, "Don't open the door," she doesn't. If the line only carries water, she sets the handset on the counter and listens while the house breathes. No one has explained how a deadline called for help. No one has explained why the calls came at the same times or why they stopped when they did. No one has explained the scratches in the concrete behind the sealed wall. It's a case with numbers and names and things you can hold, and also with a set of sounds that refuse to sit on paper. You can ask the officers who were there, the tech who pulled the dialer off the joist, the detective who cut a hole in a wall. They'll all tell you the same thing. It doesn't matter if the call came from the basement last night or decades ago. The fact remains, someone picked up a phone in the dark and asked if anyone would come.